everyone. We're back to our committee of the whole meeting. Today's Monday, April 2nd, 2012. Clerk Spencer, if you could please call the roll.
Pezza.
Here.
Gutenkopf.
Here.
Leader.
Here.
Dunn.
Here.
Graham.
Here.
Kalimsky, absent. York.
Here.
Tipskin.
Here.
Healy.
Here.
Levin.
Here.
Kennedy.
Here.
Morley.
Here.
Wagner.
Here.
Mulliner.
Here.
13 present, 1 absent.
13 present, 1 absent. We have an official quorum. Not on the agenda, but I will put on the agenda, is public forum. If anybody would like to speak for public forum at this time, please indicate that now.
Yeah, we do have one
we do.
person that signed in, Claude Pagash.
Okay, Claude? Actually, 3 minutes, and we always like to hear from you, Claude, so take it away.
Okay. My name is Claude Pagach. I live at 566 West Gladys.
Claude? Excuse me, Claude.
Yeah.
Could you speak into the microphone?
We'll try.
Yeah.
There
It's
you go.
hard to hear.
Well, most people don't want to hear what I have to say anyway. But there have been statements made that if we challenge the new city manager, we undermine his authority. I beg to differ with those statements. You as aldermen were elected to represent the people of your ward. We have a new city manager, and I assume that the old city manager had some idea of who he'd like to have. But what you did was, you hired an organization, you got people down here, you had them to come to the committee meetings, and then you selected somebody. That's what you do. You don't undermine the city manager, because if that's the case, this budget would already be passed. Would have not have questioned, not asked, not had second thoughts about any part of it. Now the city manager has asked for an assistant. I want you to do your job. The people elected you to do it. If he needs help, then get somebody to get people down here. Evaluate them. You're not undermining them. It's what you were elected to do. I may not agree with everything you vote on. I may not like the way you vote, but I do not expect this system to be thrown off to one side because the city manager says, I would like. He may like a lot of things. Do your job. It's going to cost me. But failure to do your job and go along may cost me dearly. You represent people. You ran, you said, I will represent you.
Claude, if you could wrap it up, I'll give you about 10 more
Really?
seconds.
You voted for the city manager. After some effort, you didn't undermine him. You won't undermine him if you do what you should do. Because if you're willing to accept, then all he has to do is say, and all he'll get out of you
Thank you,
is a
Claude.
yay.
Claude, you're well beyond your 3 minutes. I apologize. We try to be fair to
Evening.
everybody. Thank you.
That's all who signed in, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, very good. We will go on to our budget and continue to go through, review circled items. City Manager Grabowski.
Thank you. We are down to two circle-back items, both in administration. Well, I'm sorry, one's in administration, one's in planning and zoning. Sorry, Dan. We are down to two items. One is the consultants that we use for economic development and planning and some other issues, the museum, and the assistant city manager position. So If there's questions, we're happy to answer them.
Okay. Questions, discussion? Alderman Gutenkauf.
I think we should discuss the assistant city manager position first, and then come back to the consultants. So that would be my suggestion. I'd like to make a few comments about the position. I see that we were provided with some information on the dais tonight that summarizes what our salary and benefits total compensation for this position is going to be. And I think that one of the things that we really need to discuss as city council is what our willingness is to add additional full-time staff, and what does that mean overall? How are we restructuring the budget? How are we looking at this? And we sort of kind of touched on this weeks ago now. But I don't think we really got very far in this discussion. My primary concern when we add a new staff position is what is this obligating us as a council to pay for long-term, and how is this funded? And this is an IMRF eligible position, adding an full-time staff person, adding a full-time assistant city manager, which is something that I think we need to be particularly conscious about in this day and age, that we add an additional IMRF eligible position. Now we're obligating us to pension benefits that a position as it's been structured didn't have. And I think we need to be concerned about that. And that's a key issue for me, is, you know, what's the pension obligation for this? In this case, it's 12.91% of the salary, and the employee contribution is a small portion of that. So we really are looking at tax dollars funding ongoing pension for a position that we're adding to the city. I'm not particularly comfortable with that, and I really think we should discuss it.
Very good. Anybody else? Alderman Pezza.
Yes, I totally agree with Alderman Gutenkauf's statements. This has been my largest concern with the creation of a new position that includes benefits and pension. Aside, you know, there are other issues aside from that, but I think, once again, when we're looking at being stewards of the taxpayer dollars, this is something that has not existed. This is something that, actually, I never thought of the piece until the resident brought it up, that, you know, I guess one of the defense to it is we're saying that for the next year we will not have a sergeant position. Well, that's not in stone, that's not forever. And with all due respect to whoever the future police chief may be, that may change. So now we're back to square one, where this is an absolute added new expense on the back of the taxpayers. Not only just the salary portion, but the pension and benefits that go with it. And you know, it's not just a couple of bucks. It's a decent amount of money. And I honestly cannot support putting more burden on the taxpayer back for a position that we just decided to create. And not knowing what the new police chief will want and need also raises another question for me. So I cannot support a full-time, benefited, pensioned position to be put into this budget line this year.
Very good. Any other discussion? Alderman Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I as well have had concerns from day one in regards to creating an ACM position, in regards to adding the additional monies into the budget. I think that's the first step in creating the position, and I am not for that. I need to follow what feedback I received from the residents of my ward, and the only feedback that I've received from my residents has been asking the question on why do we need it? You just hired someone new with a good salary, good benefits. Why are you adding an additional position to the city staff? There has not been one of my residents, at least, who have come to me and asked me to support a new position in the city of Elmhurst, at least at this time. I know personally, when we went out for our new city manager, I was going for the best candidate out there. I think we got the best candidate out there. And with that, the salary, the benefits reflected the caliber of the candidate that we have, that I believe is capable of doing the city manager job with the veteran staff of department heads and directors that we have here today. Alderman Pez's comment on a new police chief is a very good one. We don't know what the recommendation is going to be when the new police chief is brought in the city of Elmhurst. They might want to do some additional changes, might want to add some staff, some administration as well, and we'll have to consider that at time. So the benefit of not having that sergeant today would go to the wayside. The other piece is economic development. When we hired the consultants we have today, the reason why we hired them was to get away from salary and pension. And that was the point of that, but now we're adding that to supply economic development. So that's another reason why I cannot support adding the dollars for the ACM position.
Okay. Anyone else? Discussion? Alderman Gutenkopf.
Yeah, I move we strike the assistant city manager position from the budget, removing a total of $149,978.
Second.
Give a second. Okay. Motion and a second. Discussion. Alderman Levin.
Well, at the risk of being somewhat repetitive, I am going to vote against that motion. We did hire a new city manager. We did a very thorough search. I was pleased to see that we had some wonderfully qualified candidates, and I think we selected the best candidate. And the city manager is our chief of staff. The city manager has come to us and said what staff needs, speaking for every department, fire, police, public works, and administration, is that he believes that the assistant city manager position is one that is needed. As I mentioned last time, almost every other city of this size and complexity has at least an assistant city manager, and some have an assistant to the city manager as well. I don't think there's any kind of credence that can be put into the concept of a police chief coming on and saying, I want a police sergeant, because lest we forget, the police chief works for the city manager, and the city manager, who's here today, working with our existing police executives, has determined that the best staffing solution for our city is to have an assistant city manager, not to have a police sergeant. The police sergeant position is also pensionable and may likely cost just as much as the assistant city manager's pension is going to cost. I know we can't talk about we're just talking about the budget, but we all know that there's a person who's in mind, and I think the unique qualifications of what that brings to the table for our city at this time is something that we need. So unless I felt that it was money wasted, or that I was going to second guess the city manager, which I wouldn't be afraid to do, but I don't think is the right thing in this case, I think that it's the right decision. We're looking at someone who can fill a position that has some knowledge, some long knowledge of what the city's all about. And I think that to say that the public is commenting, I haven't heard any comments from my ward, and I'd be happy to answer in terms of what administration means and how it's done in a city government. Whatever happened under a different city manager doesn't mean that that's what's supposed to happen under this current city manager. It's been justified. The city manager's gone out and shown that he can hold the budget. It's not going to cost any more. He's gone to the work of restaffing, restructuring it, and I am going to support the position. I'm going to vote against the motion to take it out of the budget.
Thank you, Alderman. Any other discussion or questions? Alderman Dunn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think in any organization, you need strong leadership, and you need the, in our organization, the city, $100+ million organization, we need that. And I think we have that. And our person in charge, our leader, has done a very thorough evaluation of his needs and feels that this position is needed. And the job of the leadership at the city is to manage the city, but also sets strategy and implement initiatives to allow the city to progress and perform. And with those objectives, I think we are going to get a lot of value out of that position. And the fact that we have an ultra-qualified person to fill that role is even more beneficial in my mind. I will support that position.
Alderman? Anyone else? Alderman Gutenkopf.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm almost sorry that comments have circled around the discussion of who is going to fill that position, because this really should be person neutral, if you will. This shouldn't, whether or not we add a position to the city, to our staff, and to our budget, shouldn't hinge on who we think we have to fill that position. It should really hinge on what's the ultimate need that the city has for the skills that we want, and then we should, if we happen to have a staff person that can fill that need and has those skills, then that's a bonus. This isn't about a particular person in the city. This is really about the city council as the ultimate arbiter of spending needs to take responsibility for how much, where, and how we allocate the funds that we've got to work with. And that's really the question here. So I'm really sorry that we've started to introduce this discussion of we've got a great guy. I think we do too. I think we have a really great staff person who has been very beneficial to the city. But that's not what this is about. And if you couch it in those terms of, well, we have to do this, we have to save this person, or we need this person to do these things, that takes the discussion away from what we're supposed to be doing. And now we're pigeonholing ourselves into hiring somebody for a position because we don't want to lose that somebody, not creating a position because we really need it. And that's what this discussion is all about, is do we really need this position? Can we afford it? Is it appropriate? And I don't think it is. And I think we need to leave it at that, that we cannot lose sight of our responsibility as a council to oversee funding and spending, and that's what this is about.
Thank you, Alderman. Before I go to Alderman Healy, just have a question. Towns at our size, Lombard, Downers Grove, Addison, Carroll Stream, do those towns of, populations of 36, 35,000 plus, we're 44, do those towns have assistant city managers?
I would say for a majority of them, yes.
Okay. Just want to clarify. Alderman Healy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I made my comments about the position at the last meeting, and I won't support the motion. I will support the position. Just a couple of points that are relative to the conversation. First, this budget, even as written before all the changes that we've made, we will be spending less than we did last year. This budget calls for 2 fewer salaried pensionable positions than last year. and that is net of the addition of the ACM if we add it. And then lastly, police. The budget calls for one more patrolman on the streets next year than we have this year. So I am very comfortable that the current city manager, as well as Chief Panico and Deputy Chief Gavitan and the police, professional police, have made the decision to eliminate the sergeant from the budget. If it's good enough for them, it's good enough for me. And I know that there's going to be more police on the street because of this budget. I am very much in favor of the position and the budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman. Any other questions, discussion? Alderman Leader.
I too spoke at length on this. I would simply say, and the strongest argument for hiring Mike Kopp beyond his undoubted competence is his unrivaled 30 years of Elmhurst institutional knowledge. No one else, at a time when we have lost so many senior people in this town, possesses the length and breadth of his knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman. Alderman Mulliner.
Yeah, I just want to say that I wholeheartedly support this position as well. I think that to some degree we step back and we say that we're looking at why are we creating a position. Well, first off, we had a position, even though it was part-time, of assistant city manager, and that was Mike Kopp. And in most organizations, I'm just going to be brutally honest, private organizations, public organizations, when you have someone who is extremely talented, sometimes you take that opportunity to make sure that you create or whatever you need to do to put that position in place to hold on to that because of the knowledge base that that person brings forward. If Mike Kopp happens to be one of those individuals, whether we want to say we're creating an assistant city manager for Mike Kopp or whether we're saying we need it for the city, both say the same thing. We need an assistant city manager. Jim has asked us for that, and Mike Kopp brings those skills to the table. So we need to move forward with this. I wholeheartedly support it. I also wholeheartedly support Mike Kopp. I think he's an excellent person for this job.
Any other discussions or questions? Alderman Pezza.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of points. I actually have a friend who is a city manager in a town, and her husband's a city manager in a town in Minnesota, and she used to live in Elmhurst, and she heard of this, and she said that her husband actually mentioned to her that he was surprised because the new trend is people are doing away with their assistant city managers because of budget constraints, and that his son actually wants to be an assistant city manager, and he can't find a job because so many places are doing away with that position. So just another side of that coin. I have complete faith that our current city manager can absolutely handle the job, no question in my mind. It has been very nice to have an assistant part-time, and I just think that we're talking about a year here, and it's nice to say that for this year this will work dollar-wise, but in the big scheme of things, we all know that this position is going to last more than a year. It's going to be here for a long time, I assume, and that pension liability is going to be here for a long time, and more jobs, more police, more sergeants, more of something. Government's always more, it's never less. Perfect example. So to say for this year it's fine and dandy, that might be okay, but in the big scheme of things, we have to look down the road, and when I look down the road, all I see are more dollars. So once again, I can't support this full-time position.
Good. Anyone else? Alderman Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a comment on some of the statements made earlier, one of which, when we did go or move forward with a part-time assistant city manager, or acting, if you would, the rationale behind it that was discussed was from a standpoint of this is going to be a transitional thing because of the fact that our current city manager at the time was known to be leaving, and we knew we would be hiring a new city manager. That's the thought process that I've kept throughout this discussion. Each time that this came up, we did ask for justification in regards to the assistant city manager position. The biggest piece of the puzzle, as the city manager today has stated, is economic development. I feel that what we have in place today is sufficient. We've been operating that way for at least a year, if not more. The only other point I want to make is maybe more of a clarification, and that is in regards to having more police on the ground. The last couple of years, we've been running lean on the police department underneath current or previous numbers in previous years. The additional patrolman, additional person on the ground would be restoring our count, I think, from about 2 years ago. And with that said, there's never any additional police on the ground at one time. It just helps us in regards to if there's any injuries, if there's sickness, if there's point of leaves, anyone leaving for an extended period of time. So yes, our count is increasing with this proposed budget, but it is really equating to where we were staffed in the police department a couple of years ago.
Thank you, Alderman. Any other questions or discussion? Alderman Gutenkopf.
I'd just like to make one final comment in regards to the additional comments that were made that Mike Kopp is the great fit for the position. That's true. What happens when he retires? What are you going to do then? You've made this big argument that we can't live without the assistant city manager because we need Mike Kopp. Well, he's not going to live forever.
We're going to put him on Geritol. We need you, Michael. Alderman Wagner, Mr. Chairman.
I was just going to say Michael never retired. I appreciate the history lesson on everything here, but yeah, I would just like to, this is a comment, there's no question. I will not support the motion. I support the ACM position. Day one, I mean, Assistant City Manager Grabowski came in. He was selected by 14 people that all had nothing but 100% of faith in his decisions. And this is what, day 180, maybe a 280, I don't exactly know where we're at, but all of a sudden, either we're wavering a little bit or not. I think it was very clear on day one to City Manager Grabowski that this council is extremely conservative and wants to watch every single penny of the citizens' money. Day two, he didn't come running in and saying, I need an assistant city manager. This is a decision that he has taken over time, over several months, and I think and good for him to take his time to do that. And he looked at all the departments. This position is also net of, as Alderman Healy mentioned, some removal of positions and pensionable positions. And I don't believe that this council would even approve this position if you didn't have that net benefit to the city that way. Matter of fact, I'd almost guarantee it. So I think the city manager's done a good job in his argument of why he needs an assistant city manager, but he's even done a better job with his argument on funding the assistant city manager position. So I fully support the ACM and Mike Kopp for that matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman. Mr. Chairman. Alderman Levin.
You know, I think there's probably no one that says more than I do that the problem with new government programs is that when the budgets get cut, it's hard to take it away because there's a constituency. But on this side, I keep hearing the argument of why we shouldn't fund this is what will happen tomorrow. Well, our responsibility is to budget and plan for today. And when you say government costs will never go down, well, we have cut the budget this year. So the proof's right here in the pudding. Second thing is that I know that we're not talking about filling a position called Mike Kopp, we're filling an ACM position, but it is a factor that enters into my mind in terms of what's right for the city administration for today. And these are unique skills that nobody else can bring to the table that he has. And I do agree with Alderman Mulliner. You know, in private industry, when I ran a government agency, if you have someone who brings those unique skills, you try to get a position so you can keep that person's talents. We're not creating a position for ghost payrolling or so someone can get a few extra days in to collect a bigger pension, but we're not bumping up the pension of our city payroll in any way. We're living within the budget, and we're doing what's best for our city administration for today.
Thank you. Anybody else? Hearing none, I'd ask Clerk Spencer to call the roll, please. This is on Alderman Gutenkopf's motion to take the assistant position out of the budget.
Thank you.
Okay, Gutenkopf.
Aye.
Heza.
Aye.
Leader.
Nay.
Dunn.
No.
Graham.
Aye.
Polemski, absent. York.
No.
Hipskin.
No.
Healy.
No.
Levin.
No.
Kennedy.
No.
Morley.
No.
Wagner.
No.
Mulliner.
No.
That's 3 ayes, 10 nays, and 1 absent.
3 ayes, 10 nays, 1 absent, the motion fails, and obviously that will stay in the budget. Any other discussion on the actual, Alderman York?
Yeah, thank you. I do have some prepared comments, and I just wanted to present them now versus the other discussion we were having, but I firmly believe that we need to, within reason and boundaries, give City Manager Grabowski, who is our Chief Executive Officer, Chief of Staff, as Alderman Levin referred to him, the appropriate tools that he needs to not only operate the city, but to position the city to be able to adapt and react to current and ever-changing landscapes, whether they be economic or administrative. A few months ago during the tax levy discussions and debates, I asked that we all let City Manager Grabowski venture through his first budget cycle, as I believed it was important that we let him discover and understand the true workings of the city through this process. And during the process, City Manager Grabowski came to us and identified the need for an assistant city manager, and specifically identified Mike Kopp as the best possible candidate for this position. City Manager Grabowski had indicated during the interview process that he initially did not require an ACM, assistant city manager, but then went on to express that it was important to him to assess the city department by department and then determine whether that position might be needed. That determination was made by Mr. Grabowski, and I respect that. All that I asked, as many of us did, if not all of us, is that he look within the organization and find the means to the end. I believe that City Manager Grabowski has done this in spades. He's come to us with about $325,000 in sustainable labor and benefit savings in order to accommodate this position. Couple this with just over $40,500 in budgeted savings on consultant fees in the upcoming budget cycle, and I believe City Manager Grabowski has done everything that he's been asked of him and more to minimize the impact on city spending. So next, I look at the organization of the city and how the city manager wants to enhance the organization in order to wring as much out of it as he possibly can. And again, the city manager has impressed upon me that a decision to employ a full-time assistant city manager is in the best interest of this organization and each and every one of its stakeholders. So I'd like to highlight just a couple of examples as I see them. First of all, and probably most importantly, is the city is now having to work, and sometimes very hard, for economic development. It could be said that in the past there may have been times where if you build it, they will come. And
One second, Kevin.
Yeah.
Claude, if you could do me a favor, keep your comments and your laughing down while we're discussing city business, please. I would really appreciate that. And if you do not do that, I will ask you to leave. It's your warning, okay? Thank you. Go ahead. Go on, Alderman.
I'll leave there.
Okay.
Because what I hate you doing is interrupting the alderman and making comments. You're not supposed to do it. What you're supposed to do is run a meeting.
Claude, have a good day.
I will have a good day.
See the doorway? Out. Thank you. Alderman, finish up.
As far as his comments, I hope he doesn't believe what he's reading.
Right.
so if you build it, they will come type of economic momentum that may have been prevalent in Elmhurst. I kind of lost my train of thought now a little bit.
Sorry, Alderman.
This is certainly by no means any way to discount the hard work that previous administrations have exuded, but after the Great Recession, there's much work to do to reestablish this momentum again. And whereas it might have been another condo development over there, or another auto dealer over here, the economic changes have cast different realities today, ones that we certainly may not have all the answers for, ones that we may have to work really hard to figure out, and then go through all the due diligence to validate. this is just one example of how an assistant city manager can help. The next example is IT. We commissioned a technology review by Northern Illinois University. They came to us with a great report, nice recommendations, reviewed in committee. But in my opinion, we haven't made as substantial a progress as we might have had we had the horsepower there to look at all these things and actually lay into place a plan. Gains made in the area of IT could have a compounding effect on the efficient operation of the city overall. When you factor in forecasted review and upgrade or replacement of the current city's operating software system and the change in year-end from a fiscal year-end to a calendar year-end, there are a lot of opportunities to make huge strides in information technology that can and will benefit the city and all of its stakeholders. The final example is human resources. As I mentioned the other night, during budget deliberations at our last meeting, one of the key things in human resources is a review of our compensation and our compensation package overall. Much like the city manager is not a party to contract negotiations with organized labor, I believe that this is a good role for the assistant city manager to spearhead and oversee. As total labor costs make up a majority of the city's costs, a deep dive into this area is very important as we make decisions on critical city services. I believe this will eventually morph into a negotiating task, and by having the assistant city manager and the city manager playing different yet collaborating roles in the process, we should yield the best results for all city stakeholders. As for Mike Kopp, because it has at least gotten to be a little bit about Mike Kopp, Mike was a finalist for the city manager's job when we took a heck of a lot of time to go through the whole process. If he was a finalist for the city manager's job, why would that result be in any way substantially different than that of the assistant city manager? Especially given that Mike possesses not only the skills required for the assistant city manager position, but also truly knows the community, lives and interacts daily amongst many of its residents, and is and has been working collaboratively with many of the leaders, both those established and new here in Elmhurst. I believe Mike truly wants to continue to serve the city in a critical role, just as he has for the fire department for many years. During that time, he's made himself better by obtaining an advanced degree in public administration. With Mike, we know what we are getting, we know his work ethic, we know his family and his friends, and we know he's a treasured and integral thread in the tapestry of this community, our town of Elmhurst. I unequivocally support the addition of the assistant city manager to the budget for this year, and I also understand that through continuous review of operations of the city by the city manager and us as elected officials, the changes up to and including the elimination of the position of assistant city manager, whether permanent or temporary, can be made at any time. In other words, like every other position on the organizational chart, changes can be made. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman. Alderman Pezza, and I'll go to Alderman Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I would like to concentrate on this being a budget process, not an interviewing process. And that being said, in an effort to reach what I believe, in my mind, would be a fair compromise, and out of due respect to our new city manager, who really hasn't been here a year yet, and we have been getting along well with a part-time assistant. I believe that we can still provide the people with the fabulous service that we have to keep it a part-time assistant city manager position. And I would like to make a motion to remove the $149,000 from the full-time line item, but replace it with $55,000 line item 110-1001-41.10-02 in the part-time line, which would allow our new city manager to retain our assistant city manager. It's obviously a large salary increase for him compared to what he's been receiving. I believe this would be the best of both worlds. It would take the burden of that extra salary, benefits, and pension off the backs of the taxpayer. It would allow for my COP to continue to be able to assist City Manager Grabowski, and therefore, I believe this would be a fair compromise, in my mind, for all parties involved. So I would like to make that motion.
Alderman Gutenkopf with a second. Discussion. Alderman Pezza, like to discuss, or?
I would just be repeating exactly what I said.
Alderman Gutenkopf?
I think it's a pretty fair way to keep my COP, because it's pretty clear that that's what we're talking about. This addresses my concern about pension and the fact that I really think that we need to be part of the solution and not wait for pension reform issues to come out of the state. I'd support this.
Okay. Chairman Hipskin.
I'd like to ask Alderman Pezza to clarify the motion, number one, and take into account that if Mike works more than 38 hours a week, he is a full-time employee. Therefore, are you limiting how many hours he's going to do?
Actually, the way our system set, if he works over 20 hours a week,
Right.
he would be eligible.
Over 20.
Right.
So he's
So that's
only,
considered part-time. So the motion was to move,
just clarify the motion, because
Yes.
I really, 110, this, that, I mean,
is
it's
to
hard to
remove
understand.
the 149 from the full-time and insert 55,000 to the part-time line, which would allow for the continuation of a part-time assistant city manager, which means 20 or less hours a week at the 55,000.
okay, thank you for clarifying that, and as a comment, I can't support that.
Okay. Any other discussion or questions? Hearing none, I ask Clerk Spencer to call the roll, please.
Pezza.
Aye.
Gutenkopf.
Aye.
Leader.
Nay.
Dunn.
No.
Graham.
No.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that.
No.
Palumski, absent. York.
No.
Hipskin.
No.
Healy.
No.
Levin.
No.
Kennedy.
No.
Morley.
No.
Wagner.
No.
Mulliner.
No.
2 ayes, 11 nays, and 1 absent.
2 ayes, 11 nays, 1 absent. The motion fails. And we probably move on, I would think, to consultants. Alderman Brown.
Just one more comment on this topic of ACM. I've heard a lot of discussion here today in regards to granting the requests of the city manager, which I find ironic because last year's budget cycle, last year's city manager requested certain staff and we put a hiring freeze on. So those items were actually not filled and not moved on until approximately a year later. So I'm not sure exactly why one year we're taking one position and another year we're taking a different position in regards to supporting anything that the city manager presents to us. I think this is a relevant topic to discuss. I know in my 11 years as an alderman, the ACM position has been discussed multiple times. It seemed like every other year we were talking about this position and if it's needed. I feel that it hasn't been justified to fill this position. I guess why now? Why do we need the ACM position now? I have seen some benefits with the current part-time role being filled by Mike Kopp. I don't see any reason to change that going at this point. I know City Manager Grabowski made the recommendation at this point, approximately 8 months into being here in the city, but I asked the question, why now? It seems like the ACM role is heavily being touted to increase economic development. How come we haven't brought to the table, or how come it hasn't been discussed to have an economic development director instead? The ACM position would be a newly created position, which is a new salary range. I think if anything, if we were moving forward and adding any additional position, I think Economic Development Director would be a direction to go. As the motion of Alderman Pezza just made that was turned down of having a part-time economic or part-time ACM position, I think that's where the concentration would have been. So my final thought is I don't understand why we need this now. I don't think that it should be in the budget now. It's nothing against Mike Kopp as a candidate. It's more in regards to not needing this position, at least not now.
Thank you, Alderman. I think the council has spoken regarding the position and even the candidate. So we'll move on to our consultants and City Manager Grabowski.
Thank you. The last item would be the consultants that we do use for a number of items. Part of it's economic development, part of it is public relations, and part of it is fundraising for the museum. As Alderman York pointed out, it is down, the funding from last year's budget. We have reduced that a little bit from last year. And it's my anticipation that with the assistant city manager position that those numbers will go down more this year. And I look forward to proving that at the end of the fiscal year. But this is the number that we're comfortable with going into the budget right now.
Good. Very good. Alderman Gutenkopf.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Perhaps you could speak a little bit more to some of these specifics. Where do you think it's going to go down? Why is it going to go down? And why didn't you just budget a lower number in the first place?
I think it'll go down in Mr. Bartel's in staffing the Economic Development Commission and in the retention visits. I think the assistant city manager will be able to achieve quite a bit of reduction in those two areas, and also in helping Fines All and really maintaining the economic development portion of the website, which is it was significant dollars in there this year for development of that. And so I think the assistant city manager will be able to maintain that, keep it up to date, keep it fresh, without going outside of staff to do that.
Well, and the corollary to that is why don't you just cut that out of the budget that you're presenting to us? If you're anticipating that Mike's going to staff these meetings and handle this website development, why don't we just cut it now?
Well, I think there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve with the retention visits in getting the idea of learning from the consultants that are out there now. And so I would be more comfortable leaving it as is, not spending it, and coming back to say, here's the savings that we've achieved.
I think we got to remember where we came from, too. We had a full-time economic development director, we had an assistant, and when we made these changes, we saved over $250,000 in costs by going to consultants, and have gotten a lot more measurable ROI on where our monies are going. So I think they've done a great job, and you know, obviously the management is echoing that as well, too. So we may see some fluctuation downward with what might coming on, but you know, all these guys have different roles with economic development. So I think it's important that we realize their value and their proven track record as well, too. Questions? Anybody? Alderman Morley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know we discussed this maybe even 6 weeks ago. When you talk about Mr. Bartel's, Mr. Van Slyke, Fines All, is that all out of consultant fees, that top 130.12? And can you restate the reduction under professional services under 3052? What that reduction is attributed to?
Page 129.
You're looking
Sorry, page 129?
You're looking for the account numbers and the amount reduced?
You answered part of my question, which was I did anticipate, I assumed should the assistant city manager position remain, and I guess that ultimately will be decided when we vote on the final budget. I assume that in Mr. Kopp's new full-time role, where he would relinquish his fire chief duties, that certainly some of the consulting services would go down. Is that, the number you're talking about that you just answered Alderman Gutenkopf's question, is that the 114 down to 109? Line item 3012?
Yes.
Is that the consulting reduction?
That's-
And then I
that
know
is
that,
part of it.
and I can't read my notes from 6 weeks ago, but the professional services under line item 3052 had to do with some TIF funding, or can you just refresh my memory what that part is?
We handed out a schedule, I'm sorry, we handed out a schedule at, was it the last meeting? That broke it down by
All right.
account code. I think that would answer your question.
Mr. Mayor,
Alderman Levin?
this is shot by Elmhurst in that line, if I remember correctly, was part of it. And there was some TIF activity in there, I think.
Because unless the funds are reallocated somewhere else.
Are you asking on page 129, 3052?
Yes,
That is $50,000. $25,000 is to continue the guided campaign.
right?
And $25,000 is for any extra TIF analysis that we may need if we move forward to 3 TIFs.
But this year it's estimated 125,000.
That's because it was 75,000 for TIFs and 50,000 for guided.
Got it? Got it.
Got it, all
Literally.
right.
Gotta have the in Elmhurst on there. I'm just kidding. Alderman Pezza.
Thank you, Mayor. Couple of questions. Number one, am I correct, from what I can see, that, Mr. Grabowski, you are looking, you're telling us you're thinking about reducing the consultant totals by about $40,000? Is that correct? It looks like the total you have anticipating is 182, and what we normally pay out is 222.5 according to their contracts. Is that,
That's correct.
Is that
The
correct?
estimate is 40,000 less than the maximum of the consultants.
so once again, to dovetail on to Alderman Gutenkopf, then why don't we just, if what you're saying you're going to do, we're going to do, why isn't it $40,000 less reflected in the budget so that we can be assured that this is justified and that's really what's going to happen? According to their contracts, all 3 consultants, the contracts state that they are allowed to have up to this many hours. And to my knowledge, those haven't been changed either. So they're under the impression that they can work up to that many hours, and our budget says they can. So how do we know to tell the taxpayers this has changed?
I understand that the contract has a maximum, but they're under the direction of us. And so if we direct them to say, we're going to limit it to this amount, we're going to shift some of the responsibilities, that's the direction.
Well, and I guess since the budget is under the direction of the city council, I would like to make a motion to reduce that line item by $40,000 and make it simple for everybody. The consultant line.
No, I'm not seconding.
Please.
I'm not seconding. Can I get a point of clarification here?
Gotta wait for a second. Let's wait for a second first.
Well-
Alderman Brown with a second. Discussion. Alderman York.
Okay. The way I understand it, and I asked this question specifically, is on this report that we all received, the columns that say fiscal year 2012 and 13 are actually what is in the budget. So this is only the budgeted amount. Is that correct? Okay, so that was my understanding, just so everybody understands. I mean, what you're asking for is already in the budget.
Just clarification, I thought Alderman Gutenkopf clarified that it was not when she spoke to Mr. Grabowski.
City Manager Grabowski, you want to clarify?
You had just asked that last year's budget was the current budget that we're under is 221,000, and next year is 182, 182.9. So difference approximately of $40,000.
Okay.
It's already been reduced.
So when Alderman Gutenkopf asked why it's not in the budget, if I could just maybe have Alderman Gutenkopf clarify what her question was then?
think we're just a little confused. Alderman Gudenkauf, if you'd like to
Yeah.
clarify, please?
What I understood City Manager Grabowski to say is that even though he's asking for a total of $182,020 for the consultants, he's not expecting to spend that much. So the consultant contracts come to $222,000 and change. This year's budget includes $182,000 and change for the consultants, so it's not budgeted up to the level of their contract, yet City Manager Grabowski is expecting that he will be spending even less than that $182,000. And my question was, why not budget in even less than $182,000?
Thank you.
I withdraw my second.
Okay, second withdrawn, motion is dropped. Very good. Any other discussion? Questions? Okay. We will move on with consultants as is. Anything else, or is this the end of the circlebacks?
I believe that concludes all the circle backs.
Very good. And resolution at the next meeting, I would assume, is that the schedule?
Yes, we'll move forward with the budget ordinance and have it on the agenda for the 16th.
Okay, very good, very good.
Mayor.
Alderman Brown, question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And this wasn't on the circle backs because a piece of the puzzle was actually just passed today, and that is the sidewalk policy. On page 166, line item 8034, sidewalk improvements, for this upcoming fiscal year, there's $0 budgeted for sidewalk improvements. The reasons in the past year, and the reason why it was the last couple of years, is because we've been debating the sidewalk policy, and therefore, due to the economic times as well as the uncertainty of the sidewalk policy, that the majority of the council decided not to budget any dollars for this line item. I feel now that we have seen some improvement in our revenue stream. We've also, as of tonight, come to a majority decision of the sidewalk policy, a change sidewalk policy, that I would like to propose and make a motion to add the appropriate dollars, which I always thought it was $200,000, but it seems like it's $50,000, to line item 110-6048, 513.80-34, sidewalk improvements on page 166 for the fiscal year 12-13.
Alderman Pezza?
Oh,
Second?
yes.
Are you seconding the motion? Okay, we have a second by Alderman Pezza. Discussion. Alderman Pezza?
Yes, I have a question. I guess the question would be, is there a specific place the money would be moved from, or how would we insert it, I guess is my question.
What do you mean? Is that a question directed at me?
Anybody?
City Manager Grabowski?
Where would the money come from if it were?
Alderman Levin?
I think what Alderman Bram is proposing is that the budget goes up by $50,000 to fill a void that has been there for the last 2 years. I don't think Alderman Bram is talking about moving it from any other line, if I understand correctly.
Correct. It would come from the capital improvement fund, which I believe it's come from, since inception.
That's
So it is
correct.
not coming from the general fund, it's coming from the capital improvement fund.
Question.
Yep, Alderman Levin.
Could a finance director or city manager give me some guidance in terms of when it was taken out a couple of years back, was there any thought of when it was going to come back in?
Refer to the alderman.
All right.
Alderman Brown?
Alderman
Can I do
Bram?
that?
Yes, it was, and Alderman Morley actually might be able to chime in here as well. I brought up the question, and it was, I forgot the phrase that Alderman Rose used at the time, but it was yellow stickied at the time for the following fiscal year when we removed it out of the budget the first year. So it was considered the last 2 years, but due to, like I said, the uncertainty of the sidewalk policy as well as the economic times, the full city council decided not to budget this line item. The budget for those last 2 fiscal years was proposed with $0 in it, so it wasn't like the city council removed those dollars, but it was proposed as such.
Very good. Chairman Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to clarify, the sidewalk policy and the funding of sidewalks have always been two separate discussions, especially in the Public Works Committee. So at no time have we said we're going to hold up funding because of what's going on with the difference in the policy. So the fact of the matter that we made a resolution to change the policy today doesn't in any way change our approach to funding. That said, if we are going to do anything with adding money to the budget, and I am against that because our budget doesn't allow us, because we need to be spending on things that are important rather than things that are nice, we would need to put money in excess of $75,000 for next year to cover Howard Street, which is the project that would be on the top of the list. So I'm not in favor of adding money to that. I just want to make that clarification. Thank you.
Alderman Dunn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's my understanding that sidewalk repair is in the capital budget. It's on CEB page 27. It's a project classification 4 under priority A, and it's budgeted at $150,000 a year in the capital budget. So I was under the assumption that there is funding there. No?
That's repair.
It's repair. Repair for current sidewalks.
Separate line item.
Okay.
So just to be
Thank
clear,
you.
just to be
Stand
clear,
corrected.
this line item is for new sidewalks.
Right.
50/50 program for blocks that petition for a new sidewalk on their street. Okay, very good. We have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Alderman Hipskin, Mr. Chairman.
You know what, I was just looking on page 27. On the 50/50 program, did we max that out last year?
Funded. Didn't fund it.
Which 50/50 program?
Sidewalks.
For new sidewalks?
New or existing?
Petition?
Repairs and replacements. What was budgeted on?
Chairman Kennedy?
If I might comment, I'm not sure exactly what was budgeted, and we're still spending to that. Typically, that work would be done in the fall, but because of some challenges we had with the contractor, a lot of that work is being done now and was accelerated, thankfully, due to the new weather. So I don't know that exact number, but we're still spending to that line item up until end of the fiscal year.
Thank you for that clarification and a comment upon that. I am without a doubt for sidewalks, and I support them throughout our entire town, but I'm not in support of adding more money to the budget. I certainly would support going over budget on this item if we can find a savings somewhere else. But definitely support in sidewalks. I'm just not in support in, on the last night of going through the budget, adding $50,000 or, something that we need to do. But if it comes up, I will definitely support it if we can find the savings in another spot.
Thanks, Alderman. Alderman Healy, you're good? Okay. Alderman Brown again.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to remind my fellow aldermen, this is the Capital Improvements Fund, not the general fund. This isn't in regards to operating costs. This is the Capital Improvement Fund that would fund this. I take offense to this being a nice-to-have. This is a safety issue. Those who are allowed to or currently have sidewalks, we continue to fund every year and year out to replace their sidewalks, even if it doesn't look nice. If the resident makes the claim, we go in and replace the squares in front of their house at 50/50, all the resident of Elmhurst. So I take to the offense that this is a nice-to-have line item. The Capital Improvement Fund has over $5 million in it. 50,000, 75,000, 1%, less than 1% going into this is not going to make a difference here. Again, Capital Improvements Fund, not operating costs, the general fund. My last comment here is that these residents who have been in the hopper for at least 3 years now, the 3 different streets, have been waiting patiently for the sidewalk policy to be hammered out. I do think that those two things are tied together. They were not tied together in regards to the Public Works Committee discussion, but it has been discussed at this dais by some of the individuals up here today that I don't want to fund this line item due to the fact that the sidewalk policy has not been solidified. So I wanted to make sure that that is clear. That has been in previous discussions and previous points made. Again, I hope that everybody supports this. This is something that the 3 streets have been waiting for patiently. I think we're making headway here. They've done their due diligence on their side. I think we should be doing our due diligence on our side and at least supporting it from a budgetary standpoint.
Thank you. Any other questions or discussion? Alderman Dunn.
I appreciate the clarification on that particular line item, and I was mistakenly under the impression that there was funding, that the streets that, as Alderman Ram had mentioned, have been waiting for 3 years now, and I believe that that is a capital expense that is in line with everything else in the budget here. Capital is not something that's going to shut the city down immediately, so we could consider those all once rather than absolute needs. But if we're going to make any headway in allowing the constituents without the sidewalks to acquire them, then we need to start funding those. So I think we need to put some meat into that particular line item. Thank you.
Alderman? Alderman Levin.
Well, the argument that new sidewalks should be prioritized on the same level as replacements has merit. I have 2 questions. One is for the finance director, if she could comment on what she sees as the effect on the capital budget, and then for Alderman Kennedy as chairman of that committee, I think you said something to the effect of Howard Street being the next project, and 50,000 may just be putting money in a budget where it doesn't have anywhere to go. So those are the 2 questions.
Finance Director Gaston.
No, Alderman Bram is correct. There is $5 million there at the end of this year, but that quickly moves down because of legitimate capital projects that are budgeted in the next couple of years. So there is use for that money. So it's one of those things we can't look just at 1 year. We have to look at where the other projects coming down the road. And you know, at the end of the day, it comes down to the council's decision. However, we put in new sidewalks, there is maintenance. Anything that the city puts in the public right-of-way, there's going to be maintenance to that. Is 50,000 going to break the bank? No.
Good. Alderman Healy, and then Alderman.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor?
Yep.
If Mr. Alderman Kennedy could respond to the second issue on the 75,000 required for Howard Street and what the effect would be of putting
Sure.
50,000 into the project. Thank you.
You allow that? Alderman Kennedy, like to respond to
Thank
that,
you,
please?
Mr. Mayor.
Thank
Thank you, Alderman Levin. To do the project, the city has to fund the entire project, which I believe is about $75,000. So with $50,000 in the budget, we would not be able to take on the project because we wouldn't have the money to complete it.
Thank you.
Okay? Thanks.
Alderman Healy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 2 points. First, regarding the budget implications of the $50,000 request. I have never, and I've said it, I didn't have to say it this budget cycle until now, but I've said it every budget cycle that I've been on the council that I was always against adding things to the budget unless there was a corresponding subtraction somewhere else, and to just, whether it was for sidewalks or some other issue, to say spend from the fund balance. I've always been against that. So for part of the reason I will be against the motion is that. Second part of the reason, and more importantly, there are 3 open sidewalk issues. None of them are done. None of them are past the petition stage. The reason we stopped all of them at the petition stage is because of we weren't sure where the sidewalk policy was going. We didn't stop them because of a funding issue. We stopped them because we weren't sure what we were going to do with the sidewalk issue. So we can now, I think, allow those to progress. I think we can now tell all 3 of the open sidewalk issues, projects, that they can progress. It is possible that none of the three will make it through. Howard Street is not a done deal. Crockett is not a done deal, and I forget, what's the third one? Thank you. Comstock is not a done deal. So the funding part of the sidewalks is not why those were stopped. So I don't think we have any obligation to continue those now because the sidewalk policy is done. I think we have an obligation to tell those folks, okay, go ahead and continue because now the sidewalk policy is set. And by the way, we exempted them, we grandfathered them into the old policy. Now, if any of those do commence and finish up and pass the old policy, we as a council can choose to fund them at that point. We do not have to do it now. We don't have to put it in the budget now. If Howard Street, as an example, makes it through, we as a council can decide to fund it. Because we have fund balances, whether it's in capital, it sounds like it'd be out of capital improvement, sounds like we might have 50, 75, or whatever it's gonna take. I mean, if one thing we learned on Gladys is normal numbers sometimes don't turn out to be normal. So I'm in no rush to put $50,000 into the budget because as these sidewalk projects get through to completion, we can then decide to fund if we choose to. It doesn't need to be in the budget now to do so. Thank you.
Very good. Okay, Alderman Brown.
Thank you. Alderman Healy actually touched on one of the points I was going to bring up. The past projects were grandfathered in, we're always grandfathered in. I know that it was written into the final report, but the initial discussions in committee, when I was on that committee, it was discussed and it was stated not only by the committee as a whole, but also by the Director of Public Works that those three were grandfathered in. They were started under the old policy and they should finish under the old policy. Therefore, I don't think that they were ever held up due to the policy changing because initial discussions and final discussions were always the same and never wavered. My initial motion did state $50,000 or the appropriate amount. Since I don't have Director Hughes here today, and I don't know if anybody knows for sure what the appropriate amount would be, I was just going off of the subsequent fiscal year funding by saying the $50,000 number, but my motion did state or the appropriate amount in there. The last point, I actually forgot my last point now. The point of this, though, is about funding. You know, Alderman Healy made the statement of we don't need to have any budget dollars in this line item because we can always approve it without having budgetary line items allocated. I find that hypocritical because every single report we ever sign, we always mention the line item in the budget that has the dollar amount needed to pass that particular project. And that's no offense to Alderman Healy, but we use it as justification every single time we pass a report. So therefore, making the statement that, you know, we can always pass this if it's not in the budget, that's counterintuitive that the past precedents we've done on every single report up to date. I encourage everybody to support this motion. I think this puts the individuals who would desire sidewalks on the same equality level of those who currently have sidewalks today and like them replaced. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman. Alderman Dunn, did you have a hand up?
Well, I agree that we don't want to throw things into the budget without corresponding offsets, and I would motion to modify Alderman Bram's suggestion that we, for the upcoming fiscal year, in the sidewalk repair and cost-sharing program, we have budgeted $150,000. It seems pretty simple and basic to me to leave 75 in that one and move 75,000 over to the new sidewalk installation line item.
So we have a motion. We have a second?
Is that a motion to amend?
That motion to amend?
I'm not seconding.
Anybody with a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Alderman Bram. Okay. Discussion? Alderman Gudenkauf.
While I'm in support of revisiting the $0 line for new sidewalks, I'm not in support of removing the money from the repair and cost-sharing program. We maintain hundreds of miles of sidewalks, and to cut that in half leaves us with asphalt patches and cracked sidewalks that, once they're in, I don't want to leave in unsafe conditions. I do think that we need to start moving ahead with funding the new sidewalk program, and I am frustrated that, you know, we're talking about other additions to the budget and not the sidewalk. So at this point, I'm in support of adding funding to support the sidewalks, but I think we need to at least be looking, you know, down the road, how much is it going to be this year, and are we now committed to funding the next 3 projects, or the 2 projects after this one that are in line?
Alderman Healy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Apparently, Alderman Bram and I have different dictionaries with different meanings of the word hypocritical. However, I would point to at least 2 examples off the top of my head where this council has approved expenditures not in the budget. And we've actually talked about both of them this evening. When Fire Chief Kopp was made Assistant City Manager, assistant, part-time, we found that money. It was not in the budget. When we let go of pretty much the entire Economic Development Department and decided to hire 1.5 consultants, that money wasn't in the budget. We decided it was a good idea. This council decided it was a good idea. We funded it. Maybe that is hypocritical. I just wouldn't define it that way. Point stands. If we want to fund a sidewalk without it being in the budget, we can do it. Because basically what Alderman Dunn has since changed the motion, but Alderman Bram is suggesting we spend money that's in a fund balance somewhere. We can do that. We can vote to put it in the budget now, or we can vote to do that later. So without any information, without this being discussed, as Alderman Hipkins said, on the final night of circle backs at a somewhat late hour, I'm not in favor of it. If the facts come out later when Howard or Crockett or Comstock, thank you, that's a mind block now, come through and we know what the dollars are, we can decide to fund at that point. But to try to do that now with so many facts that aren't known, I'm not in support of it. Thank you.
Alderman Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. While I appreciate Alderman Dunn's comments about wanting to fund sidewalks, I do echo the comments of Alderman Gutenkopf in that we have a pool of money to maintain the sidewalks that we have here in town, and it's over 100 miles. And there's a liability that comes along with that. And so I am not in support of taking money away from the sidewalk repair piece. I think that needs to be kept whole. I would offer that we would be looking to do an open house on Howard Street probably in the fall. We would then be understanding the dollar in that process, so that ultimately I think when we come back to this table a year from now, we would be in a position the following year and in the years subsequent to be able to fund those 3 projects. Our budget doesn't allow it. We have projects out there for the $5 million going forward in the capital. We need to have a look at these projects and how they relate with the others, because we said this was not a highly important project to do this fiscal year. Let's look at it in the coming years and decide then as to what years it fits with whatever the economic conditions are at that time. Thank you.
Alderman Pezza.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a couple of questions for clarity. So if the Howard people decide they want to come forward and go forth with this possible sidewalks, do we tell them you can't do this because there is no money allocated, or what exactly, do they have to wait to come forward? How does that work? Because there is no money there. What do we do?
Well, I would take from Alderman Kennedy's comments that we were going to move forward on that, and if it passes the new, or the standard that it's grandfathered with, that we would come back to council and amend the budget accordingly once we have the dollars.
So that is still feasible, that if that were to happen, if the money weren't there, but yet they came forward and the council said, everything's great, we'll do this, and then at that point, we could vote to find the money.
Adding to, again, what Alderman Kennedy said, we'll have to look at the priorities that are in the budget.
Right.
And the dollars that are available to see how we can make that happen, if that's the direction of the council.
But I guess that my overall question is, so does the money not being allocated there now prohibit those people from going forward and at least trying?
Ordinarily, I would say not funding a program sends a clear message that we're not going to do the program, but hearing the comments at this meeting, I guess I'm a little, I don't want to say confused, but it sounds like there's support for those 3 projects to move forward with the petition stages, and if they are approved through the petition stage, come back to the council with reprioritized budget.
Point of order. I think we should, Mayor, I think we should vote on the amendment because no one's talking about it, at least to get it. If we're going to debate the main motion, then we should at least finish with the amendment.
Call the question.
Having to call the question, we will call the roll on the amendment, which is to move 75 from the 150, and put the out of the 150, which is replacement, I believe, or repair and maintenance, moving into the 50/50 replacement program, or new program. Clerk Spencer, will you please call the roll?
Dunn.
Aye.
Graham.
Aye.
Polemski absent. York.
No.
Pipskin.
No.
Healy.
No.
Levin.
No.
Kennedy.
No.
Morley.
No.
Wagner.
No.
Mulliner.
No.
Pezza.
No.
Gutenkopf.
No.
Leader.
Aye.
All right, it looks like 3 ayes, 10 nays, and 1 absent.
3 ayes, 10 nays, 1 absent. The motion to amend fails, and we'll go to the underlying motion, which is they add 50,000 to the budget for sidewalk replacement. Alderman Gutenkopf, discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, it seems to me that just based on the timeline and the timing of what's going to have to happen for Howard Street, that it's not going to get to the point where we need to fund it until the fiscal year of 2013, 2014. So putting money into the budget this year isn't going to do anything because of the timing of what has to happen. Because the project's gotten through the petition stage. The next step is that city engineers have to go out and take a look at the spot, figure out how much it's going to cost, then there has to be an open house. After the open house, then there has to be some steps toward creating the SSA so that the residents can fund it. And we're not looking at having the open house until the fall of 2012, which means that construction wouldn't really happen until 2013. If we pump the construction season until the beginning of the 2013 fiscal year, then we can fund it, I'm sorry, the 2013-14 fiscal year, we can fund it in the 2013-14 fiscal year. We've put a placeholder of 50,000 into that fiscal year as it is. All we need to do at that point, we'll know what it's going to cost. We bump that number up to the appropriate level, and our timing is pretty much what it's going to be anyway. So even if we put money into the budget now, it'll be a real push to try to get that sidewalk installed a year from now, which would be the soonest it could possibly happen in that funding cycle.
Chairman Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I totally echo what Alderman Gutenkopf says. She's right about the timeline. We would be into the, 13-14 budget year before we would be in a position to actually install a sidewalk. So I would leave things the way they are, put the $50,000 placeholder in for 13-14. We do the open house in the fall. We understand what that number is, and we come back here a year from now and we bump it up to whatever the number is required, assuming economics allow us to do so, and we go forward with the project in 13-14. Thank you.
Very good. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Alderman Leader?
This discussion kind of reminds me of, 6 of one, half a dozen of another, in a sense, and it reminds me also of the old joke about your accountant says to you, what do you want, a profit or a loss? we can show a profit this year in the budget or a loss in this year in the budget. I think it's clear from everything that's said that if these 3 streets go through the process successfully, they will be funded, one way or the other. I think that is clear. So, time to move on. I think we should show a profit for this year in the budget.
I think I agree with Alderman Gutenkopf. I think Alderman Bram's persuasive in terms of getting these projects moving again, but in terms of the timing, I don't think it's going to be this fiscal year. I would move to put a placeholder in for the 2013 budget of $50,000, which would illustrate a commitment to, 13-14. Wish we can't go one more year, but I can't, I guess we don't even have to put that in a motion right now, but I just don't see that this is the year where it's going to happen, but I do want to express my commitment to, as Alderman Leader says, make that funding available when the projects are ready to proceed.
Alderman Brown?
Thank you. Alderman Levin, thank you. It is in the budget for next year. There's a placeholder for that fiscal year, $50,000. In regards to my previous comments, I think the statements do still reign true, and that is from the standpoint of we haven't seen a report come across the dais that didn't already have monies allocated. The assistant city manager position, as well as the economic development position, had those line items in here. As we're doing tonight, we're adding those line items in the budget before the actual report comes before us. I think it's important to note for one last time that the timeline that's being stated, these streets have started the process 3 years ago. I don't know when this timeline came about, but to say that there's an open house at the end of, or in the fall season of this year, I don't know why that can't be accelerated. So I don't understand why that we do need to put these residents, all 3 of these streets, on hold for an additional half a year when we have a policy in place, we could potentially put monies in place and actually get maybe one of these streets done within this fiscal year compared to waiting a whole nother fiscal year. These same arguments were last year and the previous year. I'm trying to do my best to move this forward. As I stated when we talked about the policy as a whole, this is a great impact to the north side of town, and I'm looking for support to make sure that we can give these residents the same benefits as the rest of Elmhurst has.
Alderman Dunn.
Yes, I'd have to say I'm a little disappointed with some of the fellow aldermen expressing a point of view that the wheels of local government are moving at a snail's pace, possibly grinding to a halt. I have faith that we can get that done. There's larger efforts that we're undertaking that we're going to get done this year, and this fiscal year ends next May 1st. So there's the spring of next year also that this would fall under. So I believe that the few steps left in the process, it's feasible to get it done. We have a great leadership team and fantastic administration in our city that works very closely and has I think in our mission statement, we mentioned customer service and service to the constituents. So I think we can get it done. Thanks.
Thank you, Alderman. Alderman Pezza.
Thank you again, Mayor. Well, I totally support the concept that it would be nice, especially for the 3 in the hopper already, to be able to get their sidewalks. I'm also torn because I am always one that would prefer to reduce a budget than increase it. And knowing that the $50,000 probably isn't even enough to fund it anyways, it's almost like, what are we talking about? So if there were clearly a place where we could pull an extra $7,500,000 easily and move it over and it really wouldn't have an effect, I'd be all for that. But to add to it and then believe that it may not even fund it anyways, it's hard for me to support that concept. But I also would like to find a way to let these people know that even though it's not budgeted for, they can still proceed, and hopefully we, as a council at that point, can address it and find a way to fund it at the time.
Very good. Any other questions or discussion? Okay, hearing none, I'd ask Clerk Spencer to call the roll, please.
Graham.
Aye.
Pezza.
No.
Gutenkopf.
No.
Leader.
No.
Dunn.
Aye.
Lumsky absent. York.
No.
Hipskin.
Aye.
Healy.
No.
Levin.
Aye.
Kennedy.
No.
Morley.
Aye.
Wagner.
No.
Mulliner.
Aye.
6 ayes, 7 nays, and 1 absent. Six ayes, 7 nays, 1 absent.
6 ayes, 7 nays, 1 absent.
That's 14.
That's correct, I counted.
Thank you.
That's correct.
Just, I don't have our city attorney with us. Point of clarification, if I vote and I break, it becomes a tie, the motion still fails, correct?
No.
You can't vote.
I don't think you
I don't
vote
think I
unless
can
there
vote.
is a
Gotta be a
tie.
tie.
Yeah, it's got to be, it has to be a tie.
6 to 7.
7, 1.
6, 7, that's,
Yeah, there's not a tie.
So
it's
I,
over.
Seven. He does
to help you,
He
Bob.
does vote.
You have to vote.
He does
do
vote.
vote.
It's the rule of
Yeah,
seven.
rule
He has to
7, you
vote.
have to vote.
And it fails if you vote aye. If you
Yes.
vote nay.
Right.
You vote nay, it fails. If it's a
That's right.
tie, it goes down. You have to vote
You have to
because
vote
it's
as
the
so,
rule
rule.
of
so either way, it goes down, though.
Right,
Okay.
right.
I'll vote aye, but unfortunately, this does not move forward because it's a 7-7.
No.
The motion fails because it's a tie.
Right.
So,
7-7.
but I believe what I'm hearing here is that down the road, once we have these projects come through, we can amend the budget. I believe, well, there may be some people that might not support a move. I think from what I'm hearing is there'll be more people that do. So I would, push staff to move forward with these projects and get them to us as quickly as possible so that we can try to get this budget allowance moved around later on this year if possible and try to get these projects done. So with that, I would ask for an ordinance on our next agenda. And I'd also ask for a motion to adjourn. Alderman Morley with a motion, second by Alderman Hipskin. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.